So I think we'll get started. If everyone could mute themselves, that would be fantastic. Yeah, I don't like to have to use my awesome powers as host to mute people. So if you could please mute yourselves, that would be great. And anyhow, before we begin with our speakers, I would like to thank our entire team at the Charles River Green Coalition, who helped us organize this webinar, especially Noreen Trocoli, John Kariakis, Leslie Graffinius, Steve Brody, Marianne Wattendorf, and Sheila and Keith Hanley. And I'm just grabbing a link so I can put it in the chat. And if anyone wants to join the Charles River Green Coalition, which is a node of 350 Mass, we meet on the third Wednesday of every month. Or if you want to join another node, that's also great. And I am putting the, somehow my chat is screwed up. Can someone else put a link to that in the chat for me, please? Thank you. So just a link to the, I don't know why my chat is screwed up. It's somehow telling me it's waiting room only. Send chat to everyone. That's what I want to do. Okay, that's better. Okay, sorry. There you go. Sorry, little technical difficulties. Sorry. So, and that's a link to all the nodes at 350 Mass, not just our node. So you can join any node and you're always welcome. I know probably a lot of you are in 350 Mass, but anybody that's not, we welcome you. We also want to thank the many people who helped us to advertise this event. There's too many people to thank on that front. So many people helped and we really, really appreciate it. And really, most especially, maybe we want to thank Evan Bell, who he didn't just set up the registration website, but he, despite my flaws, taught me all things technical, which I really appreciated. If I screw up the spotlighting or anything tonight, it's totally my fault. Anyhow, tonight we have two wonderful speakers, David Green and Mike Simons. David is someone who very kindly gives regular webinars like this on things like heat pumps and solar, and he himself has cut his home's carbon emissions to zero, and he uses his educational background in both science and business to make these often really complex issues, at least I find them very complex. He makes them amazingly accessible to the rest of us, which is so fantastic. And he is also, and we'll give you more information about this later, but he's incredibly generously offered to give anyone who attends tonight a free electronic version, not an actual version, just an electronic version, an electronic version of his book on how to get to net zero and save money in the process, and we'll put that info in the chat later after he speaks. Our second speaker tonight will be Mike Simons, who is the training and development manager at Abode Energy Management, and Abode is an organization which oversees the home performance contractors for Mass Save. And Abode got very involved in heat pumps about 4 years ago. And Mike himself is also on the journey towards getting his home to net zero, and he's 2/3 of the way there. So yay. Anyhow, we so appreciate our speakers for their time and wonderful expertise. Our plan tonight is that David will speak first, and then we'll take a couple questions, and then Mike will speak, and we'll take as many questions as you have at the end. And then that'll be it. So with that, I turn it over to Mike, and just a reminder to please keep yourself muted, and I'm going to unspotlight. Sorry, I'll turn it over to David, and I'm going to unspotlight Mike and I.
All right, let's see if I can do the technical stuff and share my screen with you all. Just please bear with me 1 minute. How does that look? Are you seeing my? I'm seeing some good thumbs up. Okay, great. All right. So welcome everyone. Good evening. Thank you, of course, to Leslie and Sarah Lyons and Steve Brody for hosting this tonight in the Charles River Green Coalition, which is one of the nodes of 350 Mass. I'm a member of a different node of 350 Mass, the UCCA, or Upper Charles Climate Action, and we do very much the same work, just in our towns. So I'm going to be speaking tonight mostly about our own experience in cutting our home's carbon footprint to zero, and cutting our electricity and our heating bill to zero as well, and making a 15% return on our investment by doing so. And that's right, you heard me correctly. You now get paid to cut your carbon footprint. This is a big change. 10 years ago, it cost a lot of money. Now you make money by investing in things like heat pumps and solar panels. I normally give this presentation, as Sarah mentioned, about all of the ingredients that we used to get our house to zero carbon footprint and zero bills. And that was heat pumps, insulation, triple glazed windows, and solar panels, which you'll sometimes hear me refer to as the Fab Four. That's what we did to get our carbon footprint to zero. Tonight, I'm only going to be talking about the heat pump part of it. So if I stray a little bit and talk about other stuff, that's okay. I'd be happy to take questions on anything you want to after the end of the presentations, but I think we should keep it to a couple of heat pump questions only about after my section, just so we can get through the whole conversation tonight. But the context I'm going to put heat pumps in is getting your entire carbon footprint to zero and getting your heating and electricity bills to zero as well. So let me just start with all the conventional wisdom that is wrong, because there's a lot of myths out there. As Sarah mentioned in her introduction, it's really easy to get confused about this. I have a degree in physics from Oxford University, and I have an MBA from Harvard Business School. So I'm well trained on this stuff. And it took me at least a year's worth of research just to figure out what made sense and what didn't make sense. And these are some of the myths I was hearing from people in the field in 2016 when I started my journey to a zero carbon footprint. And the first one is you can't do it. You can't do it on an existing building. There were a few people who admit you could do it on new construction. If you did a super tight job of the building envelope, you did a super insulation job, you could maybe get there on a new building, but no one said you could do it on an existing building. They told me it would cost you a fortune, that it'll never pay for itself. They all told me you'd have to excavate your backyard if you want to do heat pumps. They told me that solar panels would reduce the price of your house. And they told me that insulation is only for the north. And you have to take short showers, which I don't. I like to take long showers. Well, all of this is wrong. I've done it, and every single one of these things is wrong. I've done it on an existing building. Our house is a 1974 standard construction, 2x4 stud cavity walls, and we're able to get it to zero carbon footprint. Our house does not have a tight building envelope. It's okay, but it's not a super tight building envelope like you sometimes hear about in the passive house movement, for instance. It did not cost me a fortune. I did make an investment. It was about $75,000 in total. And that is an investment that's now paying me a very nice return on my investment of about 15% every year. And that has cut out the $11,000 a year I used to spend on heating oil and electricity. It pays for itself in 6 years. That's my experience. This year actually is the first year when I've completely paid off all the things I did in my program. That includes the heat pumps. You do not have to excavate your backyard to do air source heat pumps, which is what I'm going to focus on today. You do have to do that if you're going to do geothermal heat pumps, which I do not recommend. They do work. They work very well. They will cut your carbon emissions and your heat and your energy usage, but they are very, very expensive. Remember, I've got that degree in physics and that MBA. So when I did this myself, I did the discounted cash flow analysis, standard financial analysis to figure out which things made good financial sense as well as good energy sense. And what I found out is that there are only 4 things, heat pumps being one of them, insulation, triple glazed windows, and solar panels being the other, that made both energy sense and financial sense. Solar panels have been shown in large-scale academic research to increase the price of your house by between 4 and 7%. That's a very handy increase in the price of your house. And the same is true for heat pumps. It's between 4 and 7% increase in the price of your house. So this is the opposite. The reality is the opposite of the conventional wisdom. People told me insulation is only for the north. It's absolute rubbish. Insulation keeps the heat in the north, and in the south, it keeps the heat out. You need it in both places. You need insulation and low-E triple glazed windows in both places if you want to be very energy efficient and get your heating and electricity bills down to zero and get your carbon emissions down to zero too. I still take long showers, one of my little treats in life. So you do not have to dramatically alter your lifestyle in order to get to a zero carbon footprint and zero bills. As I mentioned, I've got a degree in physics from Oxford University. I'm a Brit, if you can't tell by my accent, and an MBA from Harvard Business School. So we only did things that made both energy sense and financial sense. The things we did were heat pumps, insulation, triple glazed windows, and solar panels. I'll refer to that as the Fab Four. And the not hits, what we did not do geothermal. We did not do solar hot water panels. We did not do wall insulation. Adding insulation to walls is very expensive. It does work, but it's very expensive. And we did not get a super tight building envelope, which is often conventional wisdom in the whole field. And so what separated these two was the financial calculations. All these things make energy sense. They will all reduce your energy consumption and reduce your carbon emissions, but only the Fab Four, heat pumps, insulation, triple glazed windows, and solar panels, made both energy sense and financial sense. When I did this, I was actually retired at the time. I was a bit of a long story. I had a nasty road accident in the summer of 2014, nearly killed me. And when I was at home recovering from that accident, I decided to investigate cutting the carbon emissions on our house. And I succeeded in doing so, cutting through a lot of the myths that were out there. And so what happened is after I'd published the books, which you'll get for free at the end of this, people started calling me saying, David, can you help me do this on my house? So I did start doing some consulting work. I don't do this anymore. I've gone back to full-time work now. But I did on about 20 houses and never failed to cut people's carbon emissions and to cut their bills substantially in all cases. So my work is very scientifically based. I'm that geeky physicist on the inside, very financially sound because I've got that MBA. And I'm completely independent. I don't work for any installer or manufacturer of heat pumps or solar panels. The book is free. You'll get that at the end of this webinar. There's also a slide at the end I'll show you where you've got my website address, and what you can get on that website, you can see a free version of my whole webinar, which is about 45 minutes long, plus about an hour of questions and answers. That's available on YouTube. You can just click on a link on my website and go and see that as well. Thousands of people have seen this webinar. It gets rave reviews. Now, I'm not going to tell you tonight you have to eat vegan, that you have to have fewer children, that you have to take short showers, or that you have to vote for Al Gore. In fact, I don't really care who you vote for. I don't care if you think that global warming is a Chinese hoax, or you think it's an existential threat to humanity. I'm just going to talk about how to save money. How to save money by cutting your carbon emissions. And I think we can all agree on saving money. And in case any of you are wondering, it is complete coincidence, perhaps destiny. Our family name really is Green. I'm not making it up. I got it from my father, just like I'm not making up anything else in this presentation. So let's go. This is what happened on our house. We had about 30 to 35 tons of carbon dioxide emissions at the start. And then at the end of 2016, I added solar panels on the roof and heat pumps to replace our ancient air conditioning units, and that cut our carbon emissions about 2/3, or about 20 tons. Big difference. The next year, I added insulation to the roof and to the ceiling of the basement, and replaced our ancient and falling apart double glazed windows from the 1970s with nice new triple glazed ones. That's 3 panes of glass rather than 2 panes of glass. That cut our carbon emissions a further 50%, making it about 5 tons. And at this point, I felt like, well, that was a big surprise. And it was a long way to a zero carbon footprint. So I said, well, maybe if I put extra solar panels on my garage, I can actually get this to zero. Wouldn't that be cool? And I did. So I put the extra solar panels on my garage. So I now have 2 arrays, one on my house, one on my garage. And that cut our carbon emissions to actually slightly below zero, because the excess solar electricity we export to the grid actually more than compensates for the very small carbon footprint from burning heating oil, which I still burn about 10 days a year when it's super cold. Like when we had that Arctic blast a few last week or so, I used my fossil furnace for 2 days, and that took us through that period. All the rest of the time, I can work on the heat pumps alone. So that's 35 tons gone. 35 tons per year. Gone. That's the equivalent of taking 10 gasoline-powered vehicles off the road. 1 house, 10 cars. This is huge. Cutting carbon also cuts emissions of sulfur dioxide, nitric oxides, and particulates, better known as pollution, all of which cause asthma. So you can improve your family's health too by getting off fossil fuels. Now, what was even more surprising to me than getting my carbon emissions to zero, which, remember, the conventional wisdom was you could not do this on an existing house, was that I'm saving over $11,000 a year on heating and electricity bills, and that's earning me a 15% return on my investment. Now, it's 15% after tax. So on a taxable, comparing it to a taxable investment, like an investment in the stock or the bond market, you'd have to earn maybe 18% or even 25% on a pre-tax equivalent to get a 15% after-tax return. So it's a very, very good return on investment. And of course, it's indexed for inflation, which I used to think was kind of a throwaway line, but it's actually become really important as gas prices have gone up enormously in the last year or two because of Putin's war in Ukraine. So this is a much better return on investment than I can get in my 401k or any other investment. So I highly recommend it, purely on the basis of saving money, regardless of what you think about carbon emissions. But the carbon emissions come as a big reduction too. That was my original motivation for doing this, not to save money, it was to save carbon, but it turned out doing both. So that was this is our heating bill. It was $11,000, so heating and electricity bill was $11,000 in the early years, cut following that carbon emissions in 2017 with the solar panels and the heat pumps, cut again with the insulation and the triple glazed windows, and then with the extra solar panels in 2019, cutting it to slightly below zero. So let's talk about the Fab Four. I'm a Brit, I like the Beatles. So I use John, Paul, George, and Ringo as my analogy for the Fab Four, but I'm only going to cover the heat pumps tonight. You can see this entire presentation. You can download these slides from my website for free, or you can watch the YouTube version of the longer version of this webinar on my website as well, and then you'll see the whole thing. But tonight I'll just focus on the heat pumps. So this is the effect of the heat pumps on our house. It cut our carbon emissions almost in half. It was the biggest single impact on cutting our carbon emissions was installing the heat pumps. And they cut about 20 tons of carbon dioxide per year, an enormous amount of carbon dioxide just from shifting to heat pumps. They saved us about $3,000 a year. The net investment was about $26,000. That includes the installation. And so it takes about 9 years to pay for itself. And the return on investment is about 9% after tax. Now, in addition to that, there is large academic research that shows that installing heat pumps increases the price of your house by between 4 and 7%. And on an average house, that would actually be enough to pay for the entire heat pump installation as well. And this means you no longer have to wait for that payback period, 9 years. Some people look at that and say, well, that's kind of a long time. I'm not sure I'm going to be in my house that long. But you get your money back now as soon as you sell your house, or over time as you save on your heating bills. And there are companies who will lease you heat pumps now. So even this $26,000 upfront investment, now this number is without the current subsidies. Mass Save, as Mike will go into more detail a little bit later, Mass Save provides very, very generous subsidies for heat pumps, up to $10,000. So if I had done this today, it would actually cost me far less. It would cost me about the same at the retail list price for the heat pumps, about $26,000, but I'd only be paying about $16,000 net of that Mass Save tax credit. So it's a very, very good value for money for me back in 2016, and far better value for money today for all of those all of you who live in Massachusetts, because of that $10,000 Mass Save subsidy, which, as I mentioned, Mike will go into in a few minutes' time. These are our heat pumps, and if you're looking at them and thinking, wow, they look just like air conditioning units, you're right, they do. And in fact, they replaced our old and decrepit 1990s, I think, vintage air conditioning units. And they functionally replace your air conditioning units too. So in the summertime, they cool your house. It's just in the wintertime, the circuit is reversed. And instead of pumping heat out of your house, cooling it down, they pump heat into your house, warming it up. And when they're in that heating mode, they heat with 2.5 times the efficiency of a furnace or a boiler. This is a huge gain in efficiency. And the fundamental reason is you're not generating heat by burning a fossil fuel, you're moving heat from one place to another. And it is simply far more efficient to move heat from one place to another than it is to generate it by burning a fossil fuel. And that is why heat pumps are so important as part of your overall program to cut your bills to zero and cut your carbon emissions to zero, because they have such a big effect on the efficiency of heating your house. And heating your house is by far the biggest use of energy in your life, really, certainly in your house. I mean, cars are about the same as actually a typical car. It uses far less fossil fuel for traveling, say, 12,000 miles a year than a house does on fossil fuel for heating it for the year as well. So remember, all this is an air conditioning unit that works two ways. In the summertime, it brings the heat out of the house, cooling it down. In the wintertime, it takes the heat into the house, heating it up. So let me just explain how this works. This is where I find a lot of people gets stumped by the techno babble that is spouted out by so many heat pump installers. There's really nothing complicated about a heat pump at all. Your refrigerator is a heat pump. It's as simple as that. And the heat pump in your refrigerator moves the heat, or removes the heat, if you like, from inside the fridge. So your milk is cooled down because the heat is moved to the back of the fridge, where there's that long S-shaped row of thin metal pipes that gets warm. That's the heat that was inside your milk. The heat is moved from inside the refrigerator to the outside, making the milk colder and making the kitchen air warmer. I can remember when I was a kid, my mum used to start trays of seedlings up on top of the refrigerator because that warmth would make the seeds germinate faster. So that's what happens with a refrigerator. Now imagine that refrigerator on a larger scale, the scale of your house. The same thing happens. Heat is removed from the inside of your house and moved to the outside of your house and dispersed to the outside air. So if you put your hand over an air conditioning unit outdoors in the summertime, it might be 80 degrees out with just the air temperature. It's 110 degrees over the heat, over the AC unit, because that air now has all the heat in it that was inside your house. The heat has been moved from inside the house to outside the house, cooling down the inside, heating up the outside. Now imagine reversing that circuit in the wintertime, and the heat pump warms your house up by moving the heat from the outside into the inside. That cools down the outside and warms up the inside. Remember, you are moving heat around. You are not generating heat the way a fan heater generates heat, or the way a fossil fuel furnace generates heat. And this is where it gets a little bit counterintuitive for people, because they say, well, it's cold out in the wintertime. How can there be heat inside the air? Well, a geeky physicist like me will tell you there's a lot of heat in the air, all the way down to absolute zero. And you can take that heat and move it inside the house. But the necessary effect is the outside air gets colder still. So let me show you. This is our heat pumps. In the wintertime, you can see there's snow on the ground. I'm wearing ski gloves, and it's a very, very cold winter day. It's 4.7 degrees Fahrenheit. You can see on the left there, I'm measuring the temperature using an infrared thermometer of what the outside temperature is. It's 4.7 degrees Fahrenheit. But look at over the top of the heat pump, it's minus 19.6. It's 25 degrees colder over the top of the heat pump than is in the outside air, even though the outside air is very cold to start with. And this is how a heat pump works. It makes the air outside colder, and it takes that heat and moves it inside the house. And that's why it's so much more efficient than burning fuel in a in a furnace or a boiler. And of course, because you're not burning fossil fuel, you get no nitric oxide, no sulfur dioxide, and that removes the biggest source of asthma threats to children and elderly people inside the house as well. That was a ducted heat pump. What I just showed you, our house has ductwork to pass the warm air around the house and the cold air around the house in summertime. This here is a ductless heat pump. And this is actually our rental property we have in Dover, which is where I live. And you can see the outside condenser unit there, and the indoor unit. The indoor unit here is a ceiling mounted unit. They also come with wall mounted units and floor mounted units, which Mike will show you later on. I paid a bit extra to get these these are ceiling mounted units, because I think they go better with this sort of slightly old fashioned looking decor in this house. These ductless systems are from Mitsubishi. Bosch was the manufacturer of the heat pumps for our ductwork system at our house. I recommend both of them. They're both very good, very high quality. I've had no trouble with these systems. This is something that heat pump installers will not tell you, so I want to emphasize this. There is a big effect on your bills of replacing fossil fuel heating with heat pumps. Heat pumps use electricity not to turn it into heat, but to run the fans to move the heat around. If you're using Eversource or National Grid electricity at about 23 cents per kilowatt hour, this is a little out of date. It's a little more expensive than that these days. And that's the carbon emissions of the grid in New England. And you're heating with natural gas, you'll get a 150% increase in your heating bill and a very slight cut in your carbon footprint. I'm not going to go through all of this, except to say, because these charts are in the book, and they're on my website, so you can sort of print them out and read them later. But the only way to get to a zero carbon footprint and get to zero bills is actually to use rooftop solar panels as well as heat pumps. And that's why I talk about the Fab 4. It's the combination that gets you to a zero carbon footprint, because rooftop solar panels now generate electricity at around between 5 at 8 cents per kilowatt hour, and of course with a zero carbon footprint, then that is so much cheaper than utility electricity or even MLP electricity. Some of the towns around here have MLPs. Wellesley is one of them, Boxborough is another one. The only way to get to a zero bill and to zero carbon emissions is to use rooftop solar panels powering your heat pumps. If you're so that's the combination that works. And then in order to get to zero, you need to add insulation and triple glazed windows as well. But that's the reality, which is often not told to people by heat pump installers. They want to sell a piece of equipment and get on to the next house. They don't tell you about the change in the bills that you're going to have by adding heat pumps. This comes as a nasty shock to a lot of people. It's been a nasty shock to a lot of people I know, including people who are well versed in heat pumps and energy for houses. This slide is also in the deck that you can download from the website. There are these other questions I have. I recommend you leave your furnace in place. There are some people who will tell you can heat the house year round with heat pumps, and you can, but in that Arctic blast we had just a week or so ago, I needed the fossil fuel backup. Otherwise, my house would have been at probably 55 to 60 degrees, which is pretty unpleasant. If you're okay with that for a day or two, maybe you can go only with heat pumps. But since you've got a furnace already, you're going to pay someone to take that furnace out. So why bother? Just leave it in place and it'll be your backup. Or if you want to be fancy about it, you can actually arbitrage the price of electricity and the price of natural gas or heating oil and get yourself the lowest possible bills, because as electricity prices go up, it will make more sense to heat with natural gas. As natural gas goes, prices go up, it'll make more sense to heat with electricity. These are questions I think are worth asking of a heat pump installer. Mike will probably go through similar things to this. I'm not going to go through this all in detail. It's way too detailed. I'd be here all night. But if anyone's got any questions, we can talk about this at the end and also at the end of this segment and take a couple of questions. And then at the end, I'll stay on and answer any questions people have about any of this stuff. But there are some questions I think it's worth asking. This is, again, on my website. You can download this or take a screenshot or something if you want to just keep it for reference. And I do recommend leaving the fossil fuel furnace in place. We generate a small carbon footprint from that, but it's more than offset by the solar panels we use as well. Let me just sort of quickly wrap this up, because I'm getting a little bit off topic now for just heat pumps. But the way to get to a zero carbon footprint is to do all of these things. The cheapest way to heat your house these days is to use solar powered electricity coming from your rooftop at about 5 to 8 cents per kilowatt hour to drive a heat pump. Now you've got a zero carbon footprint on your heating, and you've got the cheapest way to heat your house. Heating your house this way is less than half the cost of heating with natural gas. And that's why I always recommend a combination of these things rather than just heat pumps. But not everyone has the bandwidth to do it all at once, or has the finances to do it all at once, even though financing is available for most of these things. So people often do one thing rather than the other. The key, as I mentioned, is to do all of these things together. And let me just give you the financials as a quick summary. This is what I spent on the left side there, what I invested, about 75,000 total, the amount saved by each one of these, the years to pay for itself. The whole program pays for itself in 6 years. This is year 6 for me. And the return on investment is about 9% for the heat pumps, varies to over 100% with the installation, and the solar panels around 13%, overall about 15%, and eliminated our entire carbon footprint. And here's my final slide. You can get the PDF slides for the entire webinar, actually, not just for this one. A YouTube version of the webinar is there. There are also 300 written up questions and answers from people on webinars like this, with my answers there. And you can get the free book there. Just you actually have to order it and then put in the code CRGC23, and it will make it free for you. It's like a coupon to get it for free. This usually works, but sometimes it doesn't work. If it doesn't work, just email me, and my email address is at the bottom there, dgreen@greenzerocarbon.com. The paperback version is not free, and that's because it costs me real money to print it. And it also has a high carbon footprint, whereas the electronic book has a zero carbon footprint. There's a second edition of the book called the Stuck at Home COVID-19 edition, which I wrote during the COVID lockdown to help people do a couple of things, actually 4 things that are cheap, easy, you can do them yourself, and you could do it during the COVID lockdown. That's it. So let me hand back to Sarah, and I will end this slideshow and hand it back to her.
Thank you so much, David. The first thing, well, that was terrific. I put something in the chat with the passwords and stuff for David's book and his website, so you can copy and paste that into a Word document or whatever you want to do for yourself. The second thing I'll say is don't forget that we are taping this, because I know that was a lot of information and I know that David speaks quickly. And so there will be a tape available at the 350 Mass website in probably a week or so. They need time to process it and stuff, so don't panic, you can watch it over again. And we're just going to take a couple of questions. So if you could please use down in the bottom bar where it says, or down in the bar where it says reactions, please use the raise hand function and feel free to ask questions. Yeah, Rand.
You may need to allow people to unmute themselves.
There we go. I'm now unmuted.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, the trajectory you have followed, which somewhat parallels what we did. We did actually go with geothermal because in our case, we are fortunate. We have a well that the previous owner dug 600 feet deep. And because of that, we didn't have to drill extra wells for our geothermal.
Yep.
And we're taking advantage of the tax credits and all of that. And we have forced hot water. We have hydronic heat distribution in our house. And are you aware of air source heat pumps that can go air to water, or is that?
Yeah, yes. Let me just quickly answer that question. So the circumstance under which Rand was able to make financial sense of the geothermal is exactly right. And under those circumstances, I do recommend it to people, but it's only if you can avoid paying for the drilling of the wells. The heat pump itself is about the same cost.
Mm-hmm. Same kind of machine.
Right, it's exactly the same technology on the inside. It's just the wells. Normally, you have to drill a couple of 100 feet of wells, and that's expensive, and that's what makes geothermal uneconomic. But if you can do it like Rand did, and you can get the wells drilled for cheap or even for free, then it does make good economic sense. And there's a 30% federal tax credit on geothermal, and also is allowable for the mass save tax credits as well. So yeah, I think then on hydronic, meaning forced hot water circulation, yes, there are air source heat pumps that connect directly to forced hot water radiator systems. This is actually one of the most common questions I get, because people often think air source has to be connected to forced hot air distribution. Is not true. However, the manufacturers of the forced hot water air source heat pump systems are different to the manufacturers of the air distribution systems. The air distribution systems are Mitsubishi, Bosch, Carrier, Trane, same companies you've heard of for air conditioning units. But for the forced hot water systems, it's companies like Daikin, D-A-I-K-I-N, I think it is. It's either I-N or E-N, Jaga, J-A-G-A, and SpacePak, S-P-A-C-E-P-A-K. All these are listed on my website. If you have to go to the question and answer session, just search for forced hot water or radiators or something like that, and you'll find the answers there. But those three manufacturers specialize in doing air source heat pumps that connect to forced hot water distribution systems.
Cool.
R. Harvey.
Yes, thanks very much. Really appreciate your talk, David. Learning a lot. My question is whether you can back up a heat pump for a whole house on a generator, a propane fuel generator, like around 20 kilowatts or 25 kilowatts. Thank you.
I can't do the calculations in my head. The 20 to 25 kilowatts would be sufficient, but a backup propane generator, I think, would be more than sufficient, because remember, if the heat pump, well, the two different scenarios, right? If the heat pumps can't keep up because their heat output is not enough to keep your house at 70 degrees when it's bitterly cold outside, which is what happened with the Arctic blast last week, under those circumstances, you're just topping up the heat pump. So the heat pump might get your house to 55 or 60 degrees. So all you need is a little bit of fuel to get you back up to the comfort temperature of 68 or 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So under those circumstances, I would think a fairly small propane heater would be more than enough to get you there. However, under the other circumstances where the grid goes out, and you have no source of electricity to run your heat pumps, then I doubt that 20 kilowatts would be enough to heat your entire house, without the benefit of the heat pump. But if it's a supplement on top, then I think it would be sufficient.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I was clear on the question. I'm asking is that if you had a propane backup generator to power the heat pump.
Oh, I see.
So you get the
Sorry, different question.
50% efficiency multiplier with the heat pump. Yeah.
Sorry, didn't quite get that. So I doubt it. Now 20 kilowatts is a pretty big generator. Most of them are more like 3 or 4 kilowatts. So that's a pretty big system. So you might be able to get away with it. If you've got more than one heat pump, it might work by like switching off 1 or 2 of them and leaving you with only 1 or 2. But 20 kilowatts is quite a lot of power output. You might be able to run your heat pumps on that if your house isn't too big. On my house, I doubt that would run both of my heat pumps, even 20 kilowatts. I think it'd probably run 1. So you might be in the situation where you have to close off a few doors and keep the people in the kitchen and the bedroom or something. But that's pretty acceptable for a day or two. We used to have power outages with or fuel outages with fossil fuel furnaces. It's not like it's they're on 100% of the time. So I think a modest amount of interruption is probably acceptable to people. But I always tell people to keep their fossil fuel furnace in place, just because it costs money to take it out. So why take it out and just use it as a backup? But I think that generator would probably work if you've got a fairly small house, or you don't mind using, say, just one of the heat pumps.
I see. Thanks very much.
Okay, so we can ask more questions at the end. I'm gonna spotlight Mike now and turn, oops, I just lost him, did I? I'm gonna add a spotlight to Mike. There you go, and I'll unspotlight David. And I also just wanna thank Mike right now, because I saw that you were answering questions in the chat as we went, and that was really terrific. So I appreciate that. Yeah, and over to you.
I couldn't help myself. They were good questions. So
Awesome. Yeah, thanks.
I got a bit to go over, so I'm going to go quickly on some of these slides, and I'll take my a little bit more time on some of the other ones. But thank you, everyone, for thank you 350 Mass for having me, and David, excellent job. That was really insightful. So the company that I work for is called Webpage Energy Management. The main thing that we have traditionally done is we manage the home performance contractors in the Mass Save program. So those are the contractors that go out and do the energy audits, and as well as do all the weatherization work. But probably about 4 years ago, we started really getting involved with like clean heating technologies. And since then, it's really kind of taken off for us. So most recently, we've been running the decarbonization program for the Mass Clean Energy Center, which is really exciting. And now our heat pump programs have grown over multiple states. Just a little bit about me is David has excellent credentials. In some ways, my credentials aren't nearly as good. So I was originally like an English major from a state school, and then I just ended up getting hired as an energy auditor a little over 10 years ago. And over that time, I ran 1,000 energy audits, and then I became a trainer, and then I trained 100 energy advisors. And most recently, I've run about 600 heat pump consultations with really helping people navigate their project. And I do think I have some unique insights with my DNA is really all about home performance. And then I'm now kind of layering on top of it a high performance heating and cooling system. So I do think that I have a pretty good finger on the pulse of exactly kind of like how homes in New England and particularly in Massachusetts work, what we can do to improve upon them. And I also have a very good finger on the pulse of what the contractor marketplace looks like, as well as all the different, manufacturers that are actually having equipment sold in our region. This article is a little outdated, but I always like to just start with this. I was happy in chat to see people talking about some of the good articles that the Boston Globe has run recently for heat pumps. And one of the kickoffs of their heat pump series was this article, where Massachusetts had a goal of seeing 100,000 heat pumps installed. And then the actual number of whole home heat pump systems was 461. And I'm happy to say that I was one of the, of the 461. But some things that I wanted to highlight over here, because this is still very true in our market as you do start to explore this technology, is these. So some homeowners said that contractors affiliated with Mass Save dissuaded them from removing their fossil fuel system and going all electric. There's a discussion there of whether or not that's the right or wrong approach. Some residents said that they sought to convert their homes off of fossil fuels. Contractors, including those associated with Mass Save's energy audit program, told them that heat pumps alone could not heat a home adequately through a Massachusetts winter. And I think that the Globe article that just came out proved that that is wrong, but there is some discussions about like polar vortexes and like winter blasts that I'm happy to have. And then the last one that I want to read, or the last quote, is, out of 5 contractors he spoke with, only one was comfortable fully converting his oil burning heating system to heat pumps. So do know that this article is a little over a year and a half old, but a lot of time, when you're just going out and exploring this and just reaching out to maybe your traditional HVAC contractor, the experience will be very similar. Or say that you have a Mass Save energy audit and you're like, oh, I'm thinking about going to heat pumps. You may have a little bit of things like, oh, well, you can definitely do it. It's a great cooling system, but you probably don't want to be. So I do want to just kind of take a little bit and just digest like the facts from fiction about what this equipment looks like, how it really performs, and what traditional heating systems look like as well, and why heat pumps are so efficient. So I want to just start with this. So heat pumps, they don't get necessarily like an efficiency rating. Instead, what they get is this thing called the coefficient of performance. And a coefficient of performance is how many units of energy do you put into the system and how many units of heat does it put out. And let's just start with your traditional fossil fuel-based system. So say you buy a gallon of home heating oil or a therm of natural gas. You put that unit of energy into the heating system and you're losing a slice of it. So some of this slice of energy is going straight up and out the chimney. Some of that energy is becoming jacket losses of the heating system down into your basement. So you've just lost a percentage of that. And if you were to look at your heating system and you know that it's like 80% efficient, here's the missing 20% right over here. Additionally, with a fossil fuel-based heating system, oftentimes there's a lot of distribution losses. So say over here, I'm highlighting a radiator. If this is a steam radiator, you're probably losing about 25% of the energy that you put into it. And if it's a hydronic radiator or forced hot water radiator, maybe it's only 5%. But then once again, you're like losing another chunk of energy from your basement or from your attic down into your home. So by the time that 1 unit of energy is actually in your home, you've lost a good chunk of it. So electric heat is traditionally thought of as 100% efficient. So let's just say you take 1 unit of electricity and you put it into your toaster oven. All of that electricity gets converted into heat via your toaster. Some of that energy got converted into heat and made your bread toast. And some of that electricity ended up warming up your kitchen. 1 unit of electricity to 1 unit of heat with electric. Electricity in New England has traditionally been expensive because we're not flush with energy resources, but also 2, why electricity is expensive in New England is we're needing to have there's inefficiencies with electricity with the power plants, the transmission losses, things like that. With a heat pump, you're putting 1 unit of electricity, and just because it's using that electricity to move heat, like the refrigerator was, move heat from one location to another, 1 unit of electricity and 2.8-ish units of heat for a well-designed heat pump system over the course of the year. So it ends up becoming, if we were thinking about efficiencies, 70% efficient, 100% efficient, 280% efficient. Like, it is startling how much more efficient this equipment is compared to everything else. Another kind of misconception that tied into the Globe article that I was highlighting before is, oh, heat pumps aren't efficient as the temperature drops. And over here, I just want to highlight what happens with the heat pump as the temperature drops, and every piece of equipment from every manufacturer will be performing differently. But we're starting off with the toaster oven, 1 unit of electricity in, and it dumps out 3,412 BTUs per hour. But even at a heat pump kind of performing below freezing, close to sub-zero, 1 unit of electricity in over 2 units of heat out, over 7,000 BTUs per hour. And most of our heating season is happening above freezing. And at that point, it's 1 unit of electricity and over 3.5-ish units of heat out from this one piece of equipment. So with heat pumps, somewhere between 175 to 500% efficient, depending on the manufacturers over the course of the heating season. So the other thing that I wanted to highlight that ties into the Globe articles is that, oh, a heat pump can't fully heat my house. And I think that this is an important thing to understand. So every home is going to have a different heating load, and that's how much energy it's going to need to maintain 70 degrees inside the home when it's the design temperature outside. And the design temperature means that like 99% of all heating hours are at or above this temperature. You're not supposed to size a heating system for the record cold temperature in Massachusetts, because that happened one time. You're supposed to design it for 99% of the heating season is at or above this temperature. And depending on where you are in Massachusetts, it could be in Boston and it's around 12 degrees over there. You could be out in the Berkshires and over there it'd be 0 degrees. I'm just highlighting 5 degrees for these homes. So say you have a leaky farmhouse. That home may need 100,000 BTUs worth of energy every hour to be able to maintain 70 degrees on the coldest day of the year. Say you got like a standard World War II era Cape Cod style home, maybe around 50,000 BTUs per hour. And say that you have like a new construction home or a home that went through a deep energy retrofit. That home may only need around 24,000 BTUs per hour. So different homes have different heat loads. The other thing that I want to highlight is different pieces of equipment perform differently. So I'm highlighting some equipment right now from Mitsubishi, and people associate this type of equipment for being super appropriate for our region. But if I go and look at this piece of equipment on the left-hand side, I would see that this piece of equipment, when it's 47 degrees outside, is 30,000 BTUs per hour when it's 47 degrees outside. But by the time it's 5 degrees outside, this piece of equipment has lost over half of its heating horsepower. So say I selected this type of a heat pump and I tried to heat this leaky old farmhouse with it, I would need 9 pieces of outdoor equipment to be able to provide an adequate amount of heat. If I just selected the right type of equipment, so Mitsubishi calls it Hyperheat, but Fujitsu calls it XLHT, Bosch calls it Pro Performance. There's a lot of manufacturers that make this type of equipment. I wouldn't see that I would only have needed 3 or possibly 4 of this type of outdoor equipment. Let's say that it was a smaller home or is a more well-insulated home. Now, instead of needing 4 pieces of the right type of equipment, now I'd need 2. And say if I had a high-ish performing home that was well buttoned up, then maybe I'd only need 1 piece of outdoor equipment. So do know that like there's no right or wrong. It's not like heat pumps don't work or heat pumps do work. You need to figure out how the home's performing and match the equipment to it. So I'll speak briefly about my own home. So when I bought my own house 2.5 years ago, there was no insulation anywhere in it. It was single pane windows. It's a 100-year-old home. And one of the things that I did is I did what was called an accurate heat load calculation. So I figured out how much energy my home actually needed to stay warm. And when I ran this report, I found out that I needed 109,000-ish BTUs per hour. And when I went down into my basement to go look at my steam heating system that came with the home, this heating system could provide 129,000 BTUs per hour. So the heating system had more heating horsepower, heating capacity than my home would ever need. Let's just say that I was running my steam heating system and it was negative 20 degrees outside. This steam heating system would have also not been able to heat my home exactly to 70 degrees just because it wasn't designed for it. It's designed for around 5 degrees. I didn't leave my home performing as is like David did. I made improvements. I got my walls insulated. I fixed my attic. I tightened up the home. I upgraded to high performance windows. And after I made all of those improvements, instead of the home needing over 100,000 BTUs per hour, now it needed under 50,000 BTUs per hour. So instead of needing like 2 or 3 or 4 different like big outdoor systems, I could be powering my entire house with, say, like one heat pump system, because this one heat pump system could provide 54,000 BTUs per hour, which is more than my home would ever need. There's some additional benefits that I'd like to talk about here. So one, I just cut my equipment cost in half by improving my thermal envelope. 2, I cut my operating cost in half because I reduced the load of my home. And 3, we're needing to electrify everything. So domestic hot water, transportation, cooking, clothes drying. That's a belief that a lot of people have heading into 2030 and 2050. And all of those things that I just listed take up real space on the main electrical panel. And putting in, say, 2 huge heat pump systems, even if I have a 200 amp service, would likely be, say, taking up half of the total electrical service and just using it for heating and cooling, when we need to also get our get level 2 EV chargers, solar thermal hot water systems, heat pump hot water heaters. So it also likely ended up preventing me from needing to be upgrading my main electrical service. So do know that insulation as well as heat pumps really do go hand in hand. How much do heat pumps cost to operate? So this was already discussed in the chat. So do you know that MassSave has a heating cost calculator where you can punch in your zip code, a little bit of information about the home, calculate savings, and then MassSave will put out this little table for you that's customized that will say kind of how much it costs to heat your home with heat pumps versus oil versus natural gas versus propane, and it'll also be predicting the metric tons of carbon that would be saved. I have some grievances with it, and particularly in Massachusetts, there's a lot of community aggregation programs where the price of electricity is not reflective in here, as well as if you have on-site renewables, that's not reflected in here. And I can say with all of the work that I've done with heat pumps is a lot of heat pump systems perform wildly differently. So I think that this is a good tool. It's very slick and like easy to do, but and it's a good starting point, but I wouldn't, there's a lot of variables that people may have that are not addressed. So this is just one way that I think is a good way to understand like heat pump systems, and the chart has a lot of information on it, but let me just highlight a few things. I put all the rates that I was using on the right-hand side, and I have the varying performances of the heat pump also on the right-hand side. And then what I did is I just figured out what 10 years worth of weather data was from like the National Oceanographic Atmospheric Association. And then I just counted out the number of hours that we spend at each and every temperature, and that's what that gray is. So this gray section over here, I'd see that we spend the vast majority of our total amount of heating hours above freezing. Then what I did is I just plotted how much it would cost with all of the different fuel sources to be heating the home at that degree. And what just becomes really clear is like electric resistance would be wildly expensive. Propane is not a great choice. Home heating oil, when it's $4.25 a gallon, it's okay. It's better than some, but it's not great. And then natural gas is in blue, and then air source heat pump is in green, and then ground source heat pump is this orangish color. So one thing that I think is interesting over here is, and why I know that this chart's great, is because what I actually do see is that as the temperature gets colder and colder and colder out, at some point you see that, hey, natural gas is cheaper to run than an air source heat pump, but the ground source heat pump is always the most efficient. So what I can say is like you can do a dual fuel application if you want to have the lowest possible operating cost, but with rates being what they are in Massachusetts, and as long as you can get electricity through a competitive supplier or community aggregation program, heating with a heat pump in Massachusetts in a lot of cases is going to be the most economical option. And if you do have the option of doing a ground source, that's going to be the no-brainer of having the absolute lowest operating cost. One thing that I think is important is sometimes with talking about heat pumps, it does sound really easy to adopt them. So just put a heat pump on top of your gas furnace or your oil-fired furnace, or when it comes time to replace your central AC, just switch it over to a heat pump. That I think is really good messaging. And if a home does have a furnace or does have central AC, like always use the existing ductwork to take advantage of it. However, only about 40% of Massachusetts homes do have any ductwork. So it is important that we do need to be thinking about options when you do have, say, an existing furnace where it is an easy layup, or if you have an existing boiler, whether steam or forced hot water, of what is the right approach. So sometimes the right approach could be, if you do have an existing boiler, of just putting in some like ductless mini splits like I have behind me over here. Alternatively, it may make sense to make a real investment in your home about putting in ductwork as well. So just keep that in mind, that you don't need to be thinking like, oh, shoot, I don't have ductwork. I need to only think about ductless equipment. And just because you have existing ductwork doesn't mean that it's going to be great for a heat pump. So say, for example, say you have this colonial style home, central AC in the attic, thermostat on the second floor, and just kind of dumb vents in your first floor ceiling. Like if you just take that central AC and put it in a heat pump, the thermostat on the second floor doesn't know what temperature the first floor is going to be. So sometimes you may be thinking about like, oh, I'm going to put some ductless units on the first floor and use the existing ductwork for the second floor. So sometimes you do need to be mixing and matching some of the options. As far as outdoor equipment, there's like single zone pieces of equipment, which are typically the most efficient. And then there's these smaller multi-zones, and then there's these really big multi-zones. So do you know that typically when we think about heat pumps and we're calling them a mini split, the mini was kind of referring to these like kind of smaller outdoor units. But in 2023, there are some really big outdoor units as well that have a ton of heating horsepower. As far as the indoor equipment goes, we have wall-hung units, which are typically the most popular because installers think that they're the easiest to be putting in, and they also just work in the way that like furniture doesn't obstruct the airflow. So you put it in, and it's going to be conditioning that room or that zone that it's in really well. And if it's a single zone piece of equipment, it typically has the very best performance out of any type of equipment. The floor mounted units, and this is my house and my cat over here. I like floor mounted units the most because one, you can like really blend it into the room. It's just below the sight line. So I think that's really nice. So we just kind of like put a little table on top of it as well. And some things that I like about floor mounted units is if it's on the first floor, you can drop all of the line sets down into the basement and then straight out the house. So architecturally, it's not as impactful as some of the wall mounted units. And the last thing is, this isn't a concern for me at this stage in my life, but maybe at some point it'd be very risky for me to be getting up on a chair or a step ladder to be like changing the filter on a semi-annual basis. So I do just like that with the floor mounted ones, that it's very easy to get at the filter. And David already highlighted all the ductless ceiling cassettes. There's line, so I mentioned line sets before, and let me just say this, like architecture's real, and sometimes having these things on the outside of your house could be problematic. So do you know that there's some line set covers that can match the siding? There's other line set covers that can be painted. But the thing with line sets is you're always needing to connect the outdoor equipment to the indoor equipment. So you're always going to need to have something that's doing it. Some reputable installers are able to use chases inside of the house to get the equipment, the indoor equipment where you want it to be. But I just wanted to highlight that there is like not only outdoor equipment, but you're needing to connect the two. The last thing that I'm going to just talk about as far as like the equipment options that are available is there's what's called like slim duct units, where it's like a small ducted system that just be covering 1 or 2 rooms. And then they have these big systems that would be considered a centrally ducted system, where it'd be covering an entire floor or an entire home. So do know with ductwork that with ducted heat pump systems, there's like small, medium, and large in terms of like what the equipment could be doing. We're going to go through like 3 little Goldilocks scenarios with just thinking about what different designs could look like. So this is what I call the efficiency Maine design, and efficiency Maine has done or the state of Maine has done more for heat pump adoption than any other state in the country, which is remarkable because it's a lot colder than us. And the type of equipment or the type of design that they're promoting is just putting in like one single ductless mini split unit. And the way that this would work is the same exact way like a wood stove or a pellet stove would. The benefits of this design is it's going to be the most affordable, and it's likely also going to have really kind of get the most bang for your buck out of the heat pump equipment. So it'll be a single zone piece of equipment. They typically have the best efficiency. The problem over here is that, say, like these 2 bedrooms on this zone are likely going to be a lot colder than, say, like the living room kitchen area. Okay, there's some things some people could be doing to get around this. So for example, they could be putting in like some electric baseboard in the bedroom for backup if it's ever too cold. Or they could also be getting a wall-mounted thermostat that's communicating directly with the unit. And if you set the thermostat in the bedroom to 70 degrees, the bedroom's going to be at 70 degrees, but there is a chance that, say, like the living room kitchen area could be overheating. So do you know there's nothing wrong with this approach? It could be a really good first step with adopting heat pumps. The thing that we at Abode are trying our hardest to move the market away from is contractors thinking that this is an appropriate design. But what ends up happening in most New England homes that are decently insulated is if you put, say, a ductless mini split everywhere that you had a radiator or a register, it's likely going to result in a massive amount of oversizing. And when you oversize the heat pump equipment, it will do very good in sub-zero temperatures, but you're going to be really missing out on a lot of the performance of the equipment. So instead of it just gently modulating, it's going to be cycling on and off. And in the summertime, there's a real chance or a likelihood of very poor humidity control, which could leave you feeling cold and clammy. And also some oversized systems as well can have some problems with even overheating. So what we always like to see is what's called like a properly sized system. It ends up running at its peak efficiency. And over here, I have one example where you just put a ductless unit covering the common area. And then for, say, the bedroom wing of the house, you could be doing a slim duct unit and getting a register in each one of those rooms. And then the home would have 2 unique zones as well. So it should be extremely comfortable. It will be extremely comfortable as long as it's commissioned correctly. Alternatively, there'd be nothing wrong with just putting in one big centrally ducted heat pump system and just covering the entire house with that as well. I'm next going to talk about like what's going on in terms of like rebates and incentives and set some initial price expectations. So normally when I'm thinking about a ductless system, I'm thinking it should cost around $5,000. Whenever I'm thinking about, say, putting in a heat pump, a ducted heat pump, and there's existing ductwork, $15,000 to $20,000. Say that you're needing to build new ductwork and you want a centrally ducted heat pump, $20,000 to $25,000. That's kind of the going rate from like full service HVAC companies. If you have a guy with a van, he would probably be doing it for significantly less, but I do want to just kind of set some correct price expectations of what contractors are asking for in Massachusetts at this time. Additionally, as far as thinking about heat pump, do know that if you don't have at least 200 amp electrical service, there may be a need to be upgrading to it, but there's lots of, I've seen lots of heat pump systems getting in with just 100 amp service. So as far as what Mass Save is doing, David already highlighted it. There's a flat $10,000 incentive for putting in a whole home heat pump system. Say if you're not ready to do a whole home, or you want to be maintaining your like new-ish fossil fuel-based system, and you want to do a partial home system, then MassSafe will pay a rebate of $1,250 per ton, and a ton is 12,000 BTUs. But most homes, what that means is like a $3,750-ish rebate. But if it is a much bigger home or a much leakier, older home, the rebate could be going up. And then with ground source heat pumps, there's a flat $15,000 whole home ground source heat pump rebate, and you're able to still take advantage of the 30% federal tax credit with it as well. So I have seen some jobs that the better MassSave incentive plus the federal tax credit does make some geothermal installs pretty comparable to air source heat pump installs when you're thinking about multiple pieces of equipment. So I just wanted to give a visual of what this could look like. What is a whole home system versus a partial home system? So I have a home. So let's just first look at the blue line. So say if it's 70 degrees outside, this home, so the blue line is the house, would need 0 BTUs per hour. And I didn't want to pick a specific design temperature, but let's just say somewhere around 10 degrees, this home would likely be needing somewhere right around 40,000 BTUs per hour. Say that you put in a partial home heat pump system. So the installer is like, all right, I'm going to put in a 3-ton heat pump system. I would see that this partial home heat pump system would provide more BTUs per hour than the home would ever need, all the way down to somewhere between 20 and 25 degrees. So when it's 15 degrees outside, this heat pump is not going to be keeping up. This would be an example of a partial home rebate. And what MassSave requires is somewhere around this temperature, the heat pump needs to automatically turn off. The fossil fuel-based system automatically turns on. And then as the temperature continues to drop overnight, the fossil fuel-based system continues to run. The next morning, the sun comes up, the temperature rises, the fossil fuel-based system automatically switches off, heat pump takes over. So that's a requirement that MassSave has anytime someone's pursuing these partial home rebates. Alternatively, if someone's like, let me just put in a whole home heat pump system, I want to cut the gas line, I want to rip out the ticking time bomb that is the 275-gallon petroleum storage tank in your basement, you just put in a whole home heat pump system. This example would be putting in, say, a 4-ton system, 48,000 BTUs. It has more heating capacity at the design temperature than the home needs. This heat pump system is going to qualify for the rebate. If we were to just extend this chart or extend this graph further out, we would see like, oh shoot, at -10 degrees or at -5 degrees, the load of the home is likely surpassing the load of the whole home heat pump system. So at that point, you're not able to maintain 70 degrees, and kind of every degree colder it gets, that means kind of the interior temperature of your home is going to fall 69, 68, 67 degrees. And if that's a problem, there's solutions, and it doesn't necessarily mean like, oh, I wish I bought a 5-ton heat pump system. There's a lot of additional ways that you can add energy into your home. That's not just adding a $5,000 ductless mini split. Okay. So just some requirements that MassSave has for whole home heat pump systems. If you want to get the $10,000 rebate, you need to have an energy audit, and you need to exhaust all of the recommendations that the energy auditor would make. And if you do those things, you're pretty much good to go as long as you put in qualifying equipment and you submit the rebate form correctly. For the partial home heat pump rebate, it's going to need something called an integrated control, and depending on the fossil fuel that is existing, MassSave has a maximum switchover temperature. So say if you have natural gas in the home, the heat pump needs to be the sole source of heat from 30 degrees up. But 30 degrees less, that can be natural gas, and you and your installer are more than welcome to set that temperature down lower as well. With propane, most of Massachusetts is like the design temperature is not very far from 15 degrees. So I do think that like if you have propane existing in the home, you might as well be putting in a whole home system. The additional thing that I'll talk about with heat pumps in Mass Save is they have this great tool called the heat loan, and it's a 0% interest loan that you get at the audit, and you're able to finance $25,000 for the heat pump equipment and the installation of it. In addition to that, you're also able to finance an additional $25,000 on other things, which includes the cost of upgrading the main electrical service coming into the home, the electrical panel, putting in a heat pump hot water heater, solar thermal hot water system, triple pane windows. And if there is a balance for any of the installation work, you're also able to use it to finance that. And I think I'd get in trouble at saying that if you do want to maintain a fossil fuel-based system, Mass Save also does allow you to use the heat loan for high efficiency natural gas and propane equipment. Another thing that is really exciting is that Mass Save also has what's called a moderate income program or an enhanced incentive program. And depending on the number of people in the household would inform whether or not the incentives get better. And I kind of skipped over this slide, but let's just see. So say that you fall under this like moderate income household, the $10,000 rebate jumps to $16,000 for whole home heat pump systems. So here's kind of the qualifying ranges. So say if it's a family of 4 and there's a stay-at-home parent and they're making $100,000 a year, they get a $16,000 whole home heat pump rebate, which is phenomenal. An additional thing that's worth highlighting too is a lot of homes in Massachusetts have some things that lots of people would like out of there, like first generation of electrical wiring, which is really dangerous and mice like to chew through the protective cover of, or vermiculite, which is an asbestos, contains asbestos. So if you have those things, do know that the enhanced incentives from Mass Save also provides a grant of up to $7,000 for getting those taken out of the home. And then lastly, the insulation becomes absolutely no cost. So no cost air sealing, no cost insulation. I wish that I had more information to talk about with what's going on the federal level, but here it is. Starting on January 1st of this past year, the federal the federal tax credits went live. And what the federal tax credits mean for adopting air source heat pumps, as long as you have the tax liability, you get $2,000 off of what you'd normally be owing or paying or getting back in taxes. Every single year between now and 2035, you're able to take advantage of this $2,000 tax credit. So do know that you could have a plan for decarbonization or electrification, where it's like every year I'm just going to be putting in a new ductless mini split and take this federal tax credit. Totally a good approach. There's another thing that is going on with federal rebates, and those have been pushed off to not rolling them out until late 2023. For the federal rebates, it's likely that the efficiency programs going on in all of the states will likely be revised or modified to accommodate them, but it's going to be somewhere between $4,000 and $8,000 for heat pump systems, with low-income households getting an $8,000 rebate and moderate-income households getting a $4,000 rebate. I already put in a chat the link to Rewiring America, but if you do think that you're one of those households, I would definitely check out the Rewiring America calculator, because you can punch in your zip code, your household income, and then you can get an idea of whether or not it may be worth slightly pausing on the project until there's more clarity. As far as getting started, there's a lot of ways to find a heat pump contractor. So do you know about the company that I work for? We do a handful of heat pump programs throughout the state. You're more than welcome to go on our website, look at any of our community programs, and look at their participating contractor list to find the name of some reputable heat pump contractors. Mass Save has a heat pump installer network, but it's definitely not contractors that specialize in heat pumps. It's just contractors you really want to be offering the rebates. The Mass Clean Energy Center has their own list. Every major manufacturer, they have a located contractor tool. Facebook, Nextdoor, you know, those could be good places to ask for referrals for good heat pump contractors. And if you do have an existing relationship with a plumber, an electrician, or an HVAC company, I would definitely start the project with someone that you're already a client for, because they can probably give you some good advice as well. As far as getting started on the mass save front, do you know that there are there's home performance contractors in the mass save program? If you go to abodem.com, on the right-hand side, there's like a homeowner thing, and when you hover over it, there's a button for the mass save home energy assessment. And here's just the name of all the contractors that are participating in that program. And some of the benefits of an energy audit is 0% interest heat loan, no cost air sealing, 75% off of insulation, instant savings measures, as well as a very, very, very valuable safety check of existing fossil fuel-based equipment, with just making sure that it's running safely and it's not going to get anyone killed. As far as getting started with heat pumps, so you're more than welcome to start your heat pump journey with getting mass save energy audit, calling random contractors. If you do need help with the project, you know that we do paid consulting services for towns that we don't have a partnership with. And with the paid consulting services, we charge $150. We spend an hour with you. We do follow-up emails. And we just really kind of get you on the way and really kind of start thinking about your home and thinking about the equipment and how you should be pursuing the project. Additionally, we have this thing called a quote comparison report. And some of the reasons that we developed this is quotes are really confusing. There's a lot of information, a lot of there's a lot of information on. Sometimes there's hardly any information about it, but it doesn't actually provide any insight of how the equipment's going to be performing in your home. So what we did is we developed a really cool tool where we map the performance of the home, map the performance of the equipment, and then the output of it is we give a really clear breakdown of like what you are getting or what they are proposing with the type of outdoor equipment, the type of indoor equipment, the type of rebate, whether electrical costs are included. But then on the next page, we get like really good information with like, how is this equipment actually going to perform in your home with its like varying performance based off of outdoor temperature. And we can really highlight like which piece of equipment stinks and which one's great. And that decision alone could be saving you thousands of, not tens of thousands of dollars over the life of the equipment. So it's a really good resource. But yeah, that's everything that I got. Thank you all for your time, and I'm looking forward to the question and answer session.
That was great. Thank you so much. So now we'd love any and all questions. I know a lot of you put questions in the chat, and we'd love to, if you didn't get answered in the chat, we'd love you to ask those out loud. So again, if you could use the raise hand function under reactions, that would be great. And I will take myself out of spotlight, but I will call on you as you come. So questions. There surely must be questions. Can I start with this is probably a really stupid question that has nothing to do with heat pumps per se, but I'm paranoid. So like if I have oil and I do heat pumps, is my oil going to go bad in my tank if I don't really use it much? Is that that's probably a stupid question, but
no,
the answer is no.
No, it doesn't like ever.
It's been in the ground for 200 million years.
Okay, good to know.
Hampton has a question, Sarah.
Okay.
Yeah, one thing that I can just touch on though is there are additives that some oil companies will do that can add that would prevent from like congealing or the water and the oils from somewhat separating. But yeah, the other thing just to keep in mind with all heating systems, they're meant to not work for about 8 months out of the year. So if they're not working for 12 months out of the year, also nothing wacky happens. So there's nothing wrong with leaving a boiler down in the basement and never running it ever again. So yeah, not too much of a concern there.
Thanks. Hampton?
Yeah, I've got a house in Plymouth. The house was built originally in 1985 by a contractor for his family. They lived in it for 30 plus years. And it was there was a 1985 era geothermal heat pump installed in the house. Company based in Billerica called Megatech, which is no longer in that business, installed the heat pump, but the field was never, the well or the piping field was never put in place. It's got hydronic heating that was subsequently hooked up to an propane boiler. And what I'm looking to do now is do a retrofit and put in a modern heat pump. And I was just wondering, we've got plenty of land. We've got several acres of land that we could put in a coiled near surface, but I'm just wondering, has anyone had experience with the glacial soil, the very sandy soil down on the Cape and farther up into Plymouth and Marshfield and Duxbury, where the land may be well above the water table, but I'm just wondering about the load calculations and exactly how to figure out how many hundreds of feet of coiled near surface, say 10-foot deep cable I'd have to put in order to heat a very tight, very well built 1985 era house. And is that suitable soil, essentially nothing but sand, for transfer of heat off of a heat pump system? Or should
Do
we?
you want to take this one, David?
Yeah, it's a bit outside of my my wheelhouse, but I'll answer a couple of bits of it. But first, I've got a question. If you've had a geothermal heating system since 1985, but there are no wells and there's no ground loop, how are you heating your house?
That it was replaced, when the company went out of business before the well was dug, David, the system was left in place, and then propane Weil McLean was put in, and it was grossly oversized.
I see. Okay.
So that's
basically, you have no field, either wells or field, to exchange the heat for the geothermal system, and it sounds like the geothermal condenser unit has not been used for 40 years.
correct.
Yeah, it's not going to work in my opinion. After 40 years outdoors, like in the weather, it's not going to work. So I think but since you've got no field to connect it to, you're really starting from scratch. So I would say your house is no different than anybody else's house. You effectively do not have a geothermal system. What you have is this propane heat, which is incredibly expensive. So I would recommend you start with the mass save audit, get the insulation done for free, or actually for 75% off, get the air sealing done for free. That will reduce your heating load dramatically. And then look at, do you have air conditioning today? Do you have an air conditioning unit today?
No.
Okay, well, if you want to add air conditioning, adding a heat pump will add air conditioning as well. But it then gives you that heating in the wintertime at 2.5 times the efficiency of a fossil fuel furnace. And propane is so expensive. Propane is at least twice the cost of natural gas heating. So I think you'll find you've got a ton of money you can save here. Do you know roughly what your bill is for propane each year?
It's about, during the winter months, it's as high as about $700 a month.
Yeah, it's huge. So,
yeah, and the thing is, we put a 10 kilowatt rooftop array. So we're on the way.
Yeah. Okay. So I would recommend. I mean, I'm tooting my own horn here, but just download my book, right, and read the book or watch the webinar. I think if you do a bit of insulation and air sealing, which Get Mass Safe to do it, they'll pay for the air sealing for free. The insulation is 75% off. That's such a great deal. I would get yourself an air source heat pump. With the Mass Save 10,000 off is dirt cheap. The cost of a heat pump these days is the same as an AC unit after those Mass Save subsidies. And if you're in that middle income territory, you get even more money off. So to me, it's oh, by the way, you're all paying for this. There's no free money, right? This is all being paid for by a surcharge on your electricity bills. So if you're not doing this today, you're the sucker. You're the one who's paying for it and not getting the benefit. So you really should be doing this. Otherwise, you're just paying for somebody else to get it done. So, so it's definitely a great program to save you tons of money. Look at my book to talk about windows. There may be things you can do to help reduce the energy load by reducing the amount of heat leaking out through your windows. And with the 10 kilowatt array already on your roof, you've gone a long way towards supplying the electricity to run the heat pumps. So let me shut up, Mike, and let you say a few words.
Yeah, so I will say with the geothermal design software from like a manufacturer, like I was going to say Earth Tech, but that's the geothermal installer in Lowell, Massachusetts, water furnace. One of the inputs that they have is the soil conditions for helping to design the ground source heat pump system. And in 2023, and with GIS, there's geological site maps as well that geothermal installers consult. And if it's like, say if it's not a residential project, they're not going to like do any like test holes or borings, but like on larger projects, they would be doing like core samples as well, just to kind of hone in the project. But it's something that reputable geothermal installers would be able to help with. As far as the name of some companies, Achieve Renewable, they're on the North Shore. I don't know if they'd go all the way down in Plymouth. Energy Smart Alternatives is based in Medford. Dandelion has gotten a lot of really cool press. They're back in Massachusetts. They're back to taking new clients, so they certainly could be worth reaching out to. But yeah, there is just this high level concept of like, say with geothermal, it could be cool because you could be tying into your hydronic system. But at the same time with air source heat pumps, it could be a lot more economical. And then it could also be providing cooling. And do know with geothermal, you could also be doing cooling, but with geothermal, you're going to be needing to buy the ground loop and you're also going to be needing to buy the duct distribution system. So air source could likely be a bit more economical on this project.
I see the hands in the chat, but I'm going to ask two questions from, sorry, I see the hands, but I'm going to ask two questions in the chat. First, if you installed heat pumps in 2022, Brian asked, can you still apply for rebates in 2023?
No, the rebates for the Mass Save rebates, your installer should have put them through by now. They'll probably still approve it, but you may get a scary denial letter, but then you'll email and say it's absurd, and then they'll say, okay, this is approved. As far as with the federal tax credits, though, there's no claiming a system that was installed in 2022 for the 2023 federal tax credits.
And then a second question from the chat is, how often can a Mass Save audit be done?
Oh, yeah, it's a really good question. Kind of every 2-ish years, you're allowed to get another one. There are all sorts of like weird little nuances of like, oh, if I had an audit done by then, can I, and they said there's no opportunity, does that work for the whole home heat pump rebate, or if I had Mass Save work installed in the last 5 years? So there's a little bit of nuance to it, but I would just recommend starting off the process with just signing up for a new energy audit. because there's always improvements made to the program. So just recently, like this started January 1st, recessed light covers are now part of the program. So before, anytime that there's recessed lights in your attic, Mass Save had to pull all insulation 6 inches away from it. So it's like you have this perfect sea of attic insulation. Everywhere you had a recessed light, there's just a massive hole. I'm happy to report that's been fixed and our recessed light covers are part of the program. And additionally, before code minimum was R38, which is around 12 inches of insulation. Building code has now gone up to R49, and Mass Save is now doing that as well. So more attic insulation. So yeah, the measures are kind of always improving. So it's worth having another audit and then start there.
Thanks. Rand.
Yeah, I am in the position that before we installed the geothermal, our solar panels were keeping up with our electricity consumption, including our electric vehicle. And now, however, we're into the position where in the winter months, of course, the panels don't produce as much as they do in the summer months, precisely at the time when the electricity goes up, because now we're heating using electricity. And of course, they went and made electricity a whole lot more expensive this year. And because it's, we generate way too much of our electricity with gas, and gas has become expensive because of Ukraine and all of that. So I guess, how do I get to the point where I'm really maxed out in terms of how much area I can devote to solar panels at this point? I could make the old array more efficient by replacing the panels I have with higher performance ones. But all of this looks kind of complicated. Is there a good way to monitor electricity consumption on a circuit by circuit basis? Because I really want to understand where all this electricity is going.
Let me just say a couple of things, and then Mike's very keen to jump in on this one. He's got ideas here. So I got a couple of ideas for you. If you can't add more solar panels to your roof, and I don't think it's going to make sense to take off, maybe older generation 300-watt panels and upgrade them to 400-watt panels. That's very, very expensive for a modest gain. So I very much doubt that's going to make financial sense for you. But what I would suggest, you look at cutting your energy load in total. So I'd look at the insulation and the draft, and again, go right back to Mass Save. They have a very good insulation program, pays 5% of it, draft sealing 100% of it. And this can really cut down the amount of heating you use in the wintertime. And therefore it's going to cut down the cost of the electricity you're using above and beyond what you're getting from your solar panels. So maybe you can get it down enough that it's covered by your solar panel array. Now, maybe you can't, but at least you ought to try cutting down the energy loss from the house from the insulation and the draft sealing. Then I'd look at the windows. If you've got old single pane drafty sash windows,
we have what were good windows, double pane windows dating from about 2008 is what we currently have.
It's very unlikely to be economic to take them out and replace them with triple pane. So what I suggest, look at window inserts. Window inserts are either a single pane of glass, or sometimes perspex or polycarbonate that's in a thin, usually metal frame with a rubber like foam strip around the outside, and it's got enough friction you just push fit it on the inside of your window frame. It turns your double glazed into triple glazed, and it's about $20 a window. I've got them in my my rental house. They're very effective. They work really well. And if your windows are drafty at all, they're a huge benefit because they block the drafts as well as the insulation. So that would be what I would suggest for the windows. Also, if you have curtains, thick, pleated, lined curtains that go all the way to the floor, add R3 to R5 to any window. And that's a big gain. That's like putting a triple glazed window in is R3 to R5. So those things are very cost effective. There's no point ripping out your existing.
You mean to tell me I should have curtains in my house?
Yeah, Well, if you want to save energy, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
But I just tell you, I mean, I don't. So my house has a zero carbon footprint. I have modern triple glazed windows, and most of our windows are actually sliding glass patio doors. So we have a lot of glass in our house. The triple glazed windows are 4 on the ground floor, and there are 5 on the upper floor. And we do not have curtains almost anywhere in the house, and yet we still have a zero carbon footprint. So you can do this by sort of mixing and matching the different aspects of the Fab Four, but you don't need to be perfect on everything. And that's we're definitely not perfect. Our walls are still 4-inch cavity walls, still with fiberglass from the 1970s. But our roof is very good. Our basement is very good, and we heat very efficiently with the heat pumps, and it's all powered by solar panels. So you can still get there. You don't have to be perfect on everything.
All right.
Yeah, and one thing I'll just add is most people who are in my space who put on whole home energy monitors, the company's called Emporia, and that gives you the circuit by circuit breakdown in terms of how many watts each circuit is pulling in at any given time. So that's what I'd recommend over there. And I think the other just kind of questionable load is oftentimes with geothermal, they sometimes tie the heat pump as like this de-superheat storage tank, where it really is just like an electric resistance storage tank, in that tying into the heat pump circuit offsets around 20% of the total consumption, energy use that hot water heater would be doing. But say with a heat pump hot water heater, it'd be reducing it by 2/3. So I would be really curious to think about what's going on with your domestic hot water system and whether or not there's a real chance for.
Well, our domestic hot water is still propane, because we couldn't figure out how to make the heat pumps do air conditioning and the hot water in the summertime. There were issues with how to make the control system work.
Yeah.
And we haven't solved those yet.
I highly recommend getting a heat pump hot water tank. These are sometimes called hybrid hot water tanks in trade, because they have a heat pump on top, and then they have just a regular electric element in the tank. So in case you have, a house full of guests over the weekend, they all take showers and they run out of hot water.
Right.
The heat pump, the electric heating element, will back it up for you. But I have one of these in my basement, and it is dirt cheap to run. Because it takes the heat from the basement, which is about 55 to 60 degrees, and puts it into the hot water. So you've got a very efficient heat pump. It's at least COP 4, and maybe even COP 5. So it's very, very efficient. And I'm powering mine from my solar panels at 8 cents a kilowatt hour. So my hot water is almost free. And the final benefit, if that weren't enough of a sales pitch, is these things dehumidify your basement. Which basements are always getting damp. There's always some moisture leaking up through the floor, or there's dripping water pipes in the summertime, or there's bath over.
You may have convinced me, because we run a dehumidifier in the basement.
Which is an insane amount of electricity. You could be using that to heat your hot water. It's the same thing. The dehumidifier is a heat pump that's cooling the air in order to dehumidify and then dumping the water down the drain. That's like such a waste of energy. Just get the heat pump up water tank. You can get them from Home Depot for like $1,500. I think there's a mass save rebate on them.
The federal also, I think there's a tax credit for those too.
There's a very, very good value for money.
Yeah. Okay.
So I see Anne's question in the chat, and I'm going to get to that. And if either Dave or Mike could answer Linda's question about that link. Oh, somebody just answered it. Thank you, Mike. Lovely. I will also say, before I call on Diane, I'll just say those 2 questions to me, like if I was sitting in the audience, I might be a little intimidated by those first 2 questions, because I think of them as very high-end, very knowledgeable questions. Please do not feel like you can't ask a question that you don't feel like. If you just feel like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing and I have 5 questions, please feel like you can ask those questions. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. Any question is fine. Any question.
Because those 2 questions were a teeny bit intimidating, I feel. So don't be intimidated, please. So yes, Diane, you're next.
Hi, I want to clarify a question I asked in the chat. I have to replace my gas furnace, so I have ducts. Do you recommend replacing it with another gas furnace or a heat pump? I've been considering whole house heat pumps.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So there's a few. So how big is the house?
About 1,500 square feet, and it's a
Yeah.
townhouse.
Yeah, so 1,500 square feet, it's not a huge, it's not a huge home, and as long as it's okayly buttoned up, there wouldn't be any issues with adopting a whole home heat pump system designed to meet 100% of the building's heat load, claiming the $10,000 rebate, having a delightful cooling solution as part of it. Some things just to know is that, like, let's just say that we just had a polar vortex. It was really cold for one day. People's homes fell to say 60 degrees with right size heat pump equipment. Say that did go on for 2 days or 3 days or 5 days where it was sub-zero temperatures. There is a potential concern where it's like, oh, a heat pump isn't going to be performing as well as a gas furnace in Arctic-like conditions. But really, if you do look at the historical weather data, it's like that was the coldest day that we had in the last 5 years, and it happened for overnight, and then the next day happened and the sun came out again. So it is something to be aware of, and it's very easy to alleviate that concern with just having a electric space heater or 2 electric space heaters ready to go, or just putting a pot of water on the stove and just boiling it and adding some additional humidity in the home. So there's like other ways to be doing it, but if you just have like an existing gas furnace and modestly sized home, it's likely cheaper to be putting in a whole home heat pump system than it would be to be putting in a new, say 90+% efficient gas furnace. But other just, yeah, so I think that's the key thing. It really depends on your goals for the project. So if your goals for the project is somewhat environmentally minded, like whole home heat pump system can do it. If it's of the lowest install cost, whole home heat pump. But if it is like, say, having the best equipment in terms of resiliency and redundancy, that could be a case for gas.
Don't some heat pumps go down to -13?
Yeah, but if we remember that chart that I had, you're supposed to be designing a heat pump system down to the design temperature, and you're not supposed to be designing it down to say -20 degrees. And the consequence when you do design it down to say -20 degrees is now the heat pump is meant to go cover a 90-degree delta. Okay, so anytime that it's -20 degrees, it can provide enough heat to go from -20 degrees all the way up to 70 degrees. That's a 90-degree delta. If you think, and a heat pump system is a heating and cooling system, think of what we need to do in the summertime. On the hottest of hot days, it's 100 degrees. We're needing it to go down to 75 degrees. So it's a 25-degree delta. So if you have a heating load that's this big and a cooling load that's this big, it's never going to be an effective or an efficient cooling system. So it is really important to hone in the heat pump sizing as a heating system for it to continue to be like a delightful cooling system. And then the other thing too is, well, some heat pump manufacturers list their equipment's performance down to -17 degrees or -30 degrees. There is a bit of a capacity drop once you are in sub-zero temperatures, even for those manufacturers as well.
And what are the electric heat strips that some people say to have in addition for when it gets super cold? Or
Yeah, so there's a few different ways that these could be configured. So it looked like David had Bosch heat pump equipment. So typically, say when we see with that type of equipment has a bit of a capacity drop. So sometimes when you're seeing it for, say, going into the type of heat pump from a US or European manufacturer like Bosch, York, Bryan Carrier, Trane, American Standard, that electric heat kit is designed to really be the sole source of heat if the heat pump has turned off. So say if the heat pump has a safety thing where it turns off anytime it's below -4 degrees outside, that electric resistance heat kit would be the primary. Alternatively, some contractors will configure it to be supplementing the heat pump. So the heat pump's running, it has a bit of a capacity drop, the electric heat kit tops it off. Then there's other, yeah, so those are kind of the two primary ones, but some of the things to be thinking about with those is sometimes the heat pump is going to be taking up 40 amps, the electric resistance heat kit is going to be taking up 50 amps, and like half of the available space on the electrical panel is taken up by just those two appliances. So I do really like the Asian manufacturers equipment where you really don't need to be incorporating that at all in the designs. So it's somewhat of a case-by-case basis, house-by-house basis, homeowner's goal basis on whether or not it should be incorporated into a project or not.
So just one other comment from me. The electric heating strips do work as a backup. It's basically just an electric resistance heater, just like a fan heater. That's COP 1.0. It will never be more than 100% efficient at converting the energy in a kilowatt hour of electricity into the heat in your house. So yes, you can do it, but it's really expensive. You're now heating the house with electric direct resistance heating at 30 cents per kilowatt hour of heat in the house, whereas natural gas is about 7 or 8 cents a kilowatt hour. So yes, you can do it, but it's really expensive. And anytime you use electric direct resistance heating, whether it's a fan heater or the backup strips on a ducted system or a ductless system, it's just really expensive. And this is something that the heat pump contractors will not tell you. They will tell you it will work. And what they mean by work is they don't get the call saying my house is cold, which of course they don't want to get. But you are going to be paying very, very high bills on those days. And that's why I recommend to people who've got fossil fuel furnaces, don't take it out. You have to pay someone to take it out. Just leave it in place and put the other system in on top or around it or in parallel with it. And then on these bitterly cold days, you can have your fossil fuel heating on. And as one of the earlier questioners asked, natural gas comes on like that. Heating oil comes on like that. It's not like it's, even if you haven't been using it for a year. So I think it's a very good backup system to keep your fossil fuel furnace. You can use heat pumps year round as your sole source of heat, but if you let it get so cold out, or so if you use it when it's so cold out that you're down to COP 1, you're heating at 30 cents per kilowatt hour of heat in the house, which is, way, way more than even propane heating, which is about, I don't know, 13, 14, 15 cents per kilowatt hour. Heating oil is about 8, 9, 10 cents, and natural gas about 5, 6, 7. So it's just so expensive. It does work. It does work until you see the bill.
So then if I have to replace my gas furnace, so essentially I have nothing, would you recommend getting a heat pump with a gas backup, which some contractors recommend, or just a cold weather heat pump?
I think you'd have to do the design load calculations, right, Mike? I mean, this is more in Mike's territory, but that's, I think you'd want to know the calculations have been done properly before you make that decision. And also just what is your tolerance for it being a few days a year, for it being 60 degrees in your house? If you're okay with that and you're okay with bundling up every once in a while, I mean, we've had electricity outages around us for 3 days. We just put a couple of logs in the fireplace and everyone bundled up and we went to bed early. It's like, it's okay for a couple of days, but it gets pretty miserable if it's more than a couple of days every couple of years. So I think you've really got to sort of, just think about your own comfort and tolerance before you go for that choice of either the heat pumps or the natural gas furnace with a heat pump as well.
Thank you.
Anne in the chat asks, do rebates only apply to installing heat pumps in your primary residence?
For mass save, no. The requirement is that the home is occupied year round. So that would be that would just be my concern with how that's worded. With the federal tax credit, it does need to be your primary residence.
Okay. And then Paula in the chat said, I just had Mass Save out to my house yesterday to get my ranch home insulated for heat pumps. The cost was $707 out of pocket. Attic, damming, home air sealing, ventilation chutes, vent bath fan through the roof, soffit vents, I think that says, ready for HVAC company to come in for quotes in 1,300 square foot, 3 bedrooms. Would one ductless split work in the main living room, or should I put additional ones in bedrooms?
Yeah, so if you're a rugged New Englander, you'd be good to go with the one. And it also depends what you're using those bedrooms for. So if you already like sleeping in cooler weather, so say you normally set the thermostat down at night and you have one ductless unit covering the whole house, those bedrooms are already going to be by default at a lower temperature for sleeping. And but if one of those bedrooms is being used as a home office where you're like sitting down 8 hours a day in a room that's say 60 degrees, that's probably not going to be delightful. So that I could be considering putting in a ductless unit. And we didn't talk too much really at all about cooling, but do know that one ductless unit centrally located is going to do an excellent job of getting that space that it's in perfectly cool, but it's also going to wick away all the humidity in the rest of the house. So oftentimes just like having one central ductless unit and then just a ceiling fan in those bedrooms is going to be like 10 out of 10 comfort wise. If it is a ranch style home, I think that I'd also, if you are exploring say like multiple ductless units, I would just ask for a quote as well for just putting in a ducted system either down in the basement or up in the attic. Just because like then there's not going to be any compromises. It is going to be an investment into the home. But say if you ever were to be selling the home, you know, some people may be looking a little sideways if there's just like one emitter for the whole home versus like, oh, every room has a, you know, a ducted system from a high efficiency heat pump. So do know that it definitely costs a little bit more, but the heat loan is available and it does just become a potential investment in the home like any other home improvement project.
Harry?
So I'm looking to replace the oil forced hot air furnace with and I was considering a whole house ducted heat pump. The existing ductwork throughout the house is the old Coleman high velocity ducts, so they're 3-inch round ducts. I've had a couple of estimates and I'm getting conflicting advice. Actually, I've had 5 estimates and each 5 of them were different. One said that it would work fine, but the floors would be 10 degrees cooler as you came down in the summer and warmer in the winter because the ducts couldn't, especially in the summer, the 3-inch ducts couldn't handle the cold air. Another estimate was that I shouldn't even consider using those ducts because it's going to be, there'll be too many callbacks for performance issues, and I should only consider ductless heat pumps. So I'm wondering if you've come across these 3-inch high velocity ducts with a whole house heat pump, or should I not even consider that and go with the ductless?
I just got a question for you first. Does your house have a basement and or an attic?
Yes.
So sometimes what I've found is it's very expensive to put big ductwork into a house because you've got to go up through the walls and everything. You know, it's really a nightmare. But if you put a heat pump system into the basement, then you can run ductwork through the basement up to the ground floor. That's not too expensive because you don't have to take the walls apart to put the ductwork in. So that's a very good option for that kind of house, is to avoid the 3-inch ducts, which I think are going to be difficult. I mean, maybe you can get it done, but it's probably going to be tricky. It's probably not that much money. I would get a quote for an air handler unit in the basement, an air source heat pump with an air handler unit in the basement with limited ductwork to the ground floor. And is it a 2-story house? Then you do the same thing in the attic. So you have the ductwork running across the attic and going down to registers on the ceilings of the upper floor. And these are pretty cost-effective ways to do it. And it may end up being cheaper that way than doing a ductless mini split system, because you often end up putting in a lot of indoor units to get the temperatures the way you want it throughout the house, and that ends up being really expensive. So I definitely ask for it to be done both ways, be quoted both ways, with that limited ductwork in the basement and limited ductwork in the attic. If you do this, one thing you must do is you must insulate the sloped parts of the roof so that the air handler unit in the attic is inside the thermal envelope. Otherwise, you'll get ice dams and all kinds of water backing up into the roof in the wintertime.
Yeah, the attic is insulated and it's a cathedral ceiling except for
Okay.
a small knee wall. The basement is 3/4 finished, so it would require ripping out ceilings on the ducts up to the first floor.
Yeah, one thing that I'm happy to just touch on in terms of the equipment. So with the high velocity system, so some tricky things about it is with high velocity, Unico and SpacePack are really the two main manufacturers. How the equipment is measured in terms of the efficiency, high velocity means that it's small duct, so it needs a really big fan to be pushing the air through and to provide enough cubic feet per minute per room. Because it is a big fan that uses a lot of electricity, all of the SEER ratings, the HSPF ratings are lower than what would ever be considered Energy Star. So anytime you're putting in, say, a high velocity system tied to a high performing heat pump, it's not going to qualify for any of the rebates because the wattage draw on the blower motor kind of instantly disqualifies it. If you are looking for, so do you know that like Unico and Bosch, Unico and Bosch, so those two have compatible, they have a heat pump air handler to, they have a heat pump air handler to a cold climate heat pump system with excellent performance. So it is doable, it's just not going to be rebate eligible. The other thing, if you are like, if you want to like, it's definitely going to be a bigger investment, and but do know with air to water heat pumps, the air to water heat pump could be a rebate eligible system, and instead of sending refrigerant over to the high velocity air handler, it could be sending hot or chilled water over to it. And I have seen one project come through in my work, the contractor is called Comfort Craftsman, where they did just that. They put in an Arctic heat pump was the name of the manufacturer, and they just put in a hydronic high velocity air handler, and then the customer was able to claim the $10,000 Mass Save whole home heat pump rebate. There's a few different options, but this is one of the type of projects where if there's ever a reason to be thinking about paying for retail consulting, like these are the types of trickinesses where it certainly could be making sense.
Yeah, what if the whole house heat pump was hooked up to the existing 3-inch ducts? They're not insulated like the standard high velocity ones, but they're just 3-inch metal pipes that go through the walls and come out to the standard registers. And actually, they come out of the ceiling, oddly enough.
Yeah, so the thing with the whole home heat pump rebate, it needs to be on the Mass Save qualified product list and have an actual AHRI number. So I do think that just anytime that you're dealing with the high velocity air handler, it's instantly not going to be appearing on that list.
Oh, okay. Okay, so even if I stayed with the existing ducts, I still need the higher wattage fan.
Yep, you got it.
One of the other quotes was to keep the oil furnace and do the ductless, and you could use the furnace as a backup. But I thought the Mass Save rebates, if you did the whole house, so say I did mini splits that covered the whole house, I thought you had to remove any fossil fuel burner to get the rebate. But then I've seen some places, if you sign an attestation that you only use it below a certain temperature, you still qualify. That wasn't
Yeah, you don't have to decommission anything or rip it out at this. For 2023, it is just based on the honor system. And if your heating system is also doing your domestic hot water, you're still fine to not to use your heating system to be doing your domestic hot water. So there is on-site there is post QC inspections that happen, but yeah, Mass Save doesn't make anyone rip anything out. You're just signing off that you're not going to be using it unless there's an emergency.
Great,
Can I just ask what QC means? Post QC? Post?
Oh, quality control.
Thank you. Sorry to be clueless. Nada, you sent me a private message. I'm pretty sure that they just answered your question, but if it did not answer your question, can you send me another message? C. Fitzgibbon, if all you own, asked in the chat, if all you own is a heat pump and multiple day polar vortex is forecast, can we winterize our home and drain forced hot water baseboard radiators and plumbing if we go out of town?
Let me just a couple of comments on that. So if you've got a new heat pump, the heat pump will almost certainly come with Wi-Fi thermostats. And if you've got Wi-Fi thermostats, as I do in my house now, I can control the temperature. I can set the temperature from anywhere. So I do this when we go away, I set the temperature down. So typically, you know, if we're flying away somewhere in the wintertime, maybe going somewhere warm for the winter, on the Mass Pike in the way to Logan Airport, I just turn down the thermostats to 55 or something. And then on the way back, in the airport on the way back, I turn it back up again to 70 degrees, and it's maybe not quite 70 degrees when I get home, maybe it's 68 or something, but that works really well. So I'd definitely recommend that as a way around it. Draining your radiators every time you go away, it sounds like a massive pain to me. You then got to fill them up again and bleed the air out of all the radiators. I mean, that's a lot of work. Do you really do that?
Do you want to say anything? She don't have to. I think she just wanted to be in. He or she just wanted to be in the chat. Sorry. So
All right.
Leslie asked, and Mike, did you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, the bleeding of the draining of the radiator seems weird. One thing that I think this question is worth highlighting though is like, say if you are switching over from a forced hot water heating system over to whole home heat pumps, deep consideration should be made of how those pipes were run. So say, for example, that you have a tuck under garage, like a garage that's attached to your home, and there's like a great room above it, and there is baseboards over in that space. Like I would, before thinking like, oh, I'm going whole home heat pumps with ductless mini splits, like I would definitely have a plumbing professional evaluate how the piping is run to your existing baseboards, because it very well could be that those pipes are more outside the thermal envelope than inside the thermal envelope, and there could be some concerns of pipes freezing. Like a very common house in Massachusetts is a raised ranch, and 90% of them have a little overhang or a cantilever between like the finished basement and the second floor, and oftentimes plumbing is just running straight into the overhang and up, and that is oftentimes more outside than inside. So do you know that sometimes there's some real considerations that should be made with going whole home heat pumps with existing forced hot water distribution systems? But typically if the home is steam, forced hot air, there's really no considerations. Like there's no more of a likelihood of pipes freezing with a heat pump than with any other type of heating system.
And Leslie in the chat asks, why are we supposed to, she's referring here to the temperature of the heat pumps that you set it at. Why are we supposed to set it, the temperature, and forget it on the heat pumps?
Oh yeah, that's a really good question. So we, David beat up electric heat kits earlier, and that's the main reason. So oftentimes, say with a centrally ducted heat pump that is an electric heat strip inside of it, say you set the temperature down to 60 degrees at night, and then you come and wake up and you crank the thermostat to 68 degrees. A lot of the time with those manufacturers, if there's ever more than a 2-degree delta, what will happen is the electric resistance heat kit will fire to try to quickly recover. And at that point, the coefficient of the performance of the heat pump isn't 4, it's going to be 1.5 because the electric resistance is part of the mix. So the set it and forget it methodology is really related to that type of equipment. But even with the ductless equipment, they're always more efficient if they're just gently humming along than trying to quickly recover. So it is a best practice, but it's not an absolute in every case.
So I'm gonna use
And
my
Brian-
power. I'm gonna use my power as host to ask a follow-up on that. So does that mean if I lowered it at night and then raised it in the morning, that I should use my fossil fuels to raise it and then go back to the heat pumps or something? Is that what you're saying?
No, so what I do is I do not take that advice of set it and forget it. So I have programmable thermostats. I can set them from my iPhone, and I program it so they go down at night. So our daytime temperature is about 70, and I turn it down to, I think it's 55 degrees downstairs overnight, and maybe 65 degrees upstairs, something where the bedrooms are, something like that. But then what I do is I turn the heat back up at 5:30 a.m. So it's got at least an hour and a half before anyone gets up for breakfast. And by by 7 o'clock or 6:30, it's back up to 70 degrees. So just don't expect it to come back up to 70 degrees in 5 minutes. And fossil fuel furnaces do have this one advantage where they just put out enormous amounts of heat. So the amount of time it takes to get the temperature up from the setback overnight to the temperature you want during the day is very short, and heat pumps cannot put out that amount of heat. So you really need to allow for that by bringing the heat pump back up to 70 degrees, a couple of hours before you get up. Otherwise, it is going to be a bit chilly in the morning.
Okay. Irene asks, why is there no rebate for a partial load air to water heat pump?
Probably that's a good question that I don't have a concrete answer for. I think that pretty much most people, with the cost of the equipment of going with air to water, I think that most people are just putting in whole home systems. But yeah, I don't know why Mass Save doesn't have the partial home, just the flat 10K for the whole home air to water. The loads are, I'm not 100% sure. I wasn't in the room when they decided on the rebate amounts.
Brian's been waiting a long time.
No, I know he disappeared though. Brian, did you still have your question? Okay, so then David in the chat, I think this is the last.
This is Brian.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I kind of got the answer. The question I had been wanting to ask was about raising and lowering the temperature on my heat pumps, because the installer was just like, don't do it, leave it and forget it, and I just didn't understand why he was, pushing that method so much. But after listening, I understand now.
Well, again, they're not paying the bills. They don't want that call that says, hey, my house is freezing cold, why you sold me this bad heat pump? They just don't want that call. They just say, set it and forget it, set it at 70 degrees day and night. But that does not save you the most amount of money. As long as you're not troubled by the house being a little cooler if you get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom or something. I think it definitely saves you money and saves you energy and saves you carbon emissions by setting the temperature down at night. But just remember, the heat pumps don't have the big heat output that a natural gas furnace or oil furnace does. So just set the temperature back up again a couple of hours before you get up, and then the house will be nice and warm. And you can always experiment with that, set it for 6 a.m. or 5 a.m. and see what it's like when you actually get up.
Thank you.
So there's 2 more questions in the chat. The first one is, we are in the process of having heat pumps installed. The electrician recommended upgrading our electrical service to 200 amps. Did someone say there's a rebate for that? Must it be completed before the heat pump installation is complete?
$600 federal tax credit for upgrading your main electrical service and panel to be adopting kind of an electrification measure. And then you can finance up to $5,000 using the Mass Save Heat loan as well. So that's kind of all the initiatives right now going on with it.
Okay. And then Carol asks, if you install heat pump and keep gas furnaces back up, does that count as whole house?
So typically I think that it could and it couldn't. So it really does depend on the equipment selection. So say if you have an existing gas furnace that has a blower motor on it, and you're putting on a whole home heat pump on top of it, so you're replacing the AC coil and putting in a heat pump, there's a chance that you could be signing off on the form and saying that this is a whole home heat pump system. I will say that most of that equipment type is less appropriate for our region than the centrally ducted systems from the Asian manufacturers like Mitsubishi, Fujitsu, Daikin, LG, Haier, Gree. So it could be done. Mass Save wouldn't deny the rebate, but I do wonder if that really is going to be always a whole home heat pump system.
Okay, so that thank you everyone for coming, and I really want to thank our speakers, Mike and David. That was so informative and so helpful. And I'm just putting in the chat the link to 350 Mass to remind everybody that if you want to listen again, because I know I'm going to want to listen again because it was a lot of information. That video will be posted probably by next week. I think, you know, Evan gets a little busy, but I'm sure it'll be posted by next week. And anyhow, thank you all for coming, and thank you for Mike and David and your amazing expertise. So I hope everybody has a good night.
You're very welcome, everyone. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Welcome.